Hello, hello. Can you hear me? Yes, you can, I think. Welcome, everyone. It's a nice full house. I can see there are still some people arriving, but we will get started because we've got a lot to talk about. Welcome also to the people who are tuning in at home. We've got plenty of people participating here. Just to give some context, tonight's program is a part of the Future Pathways of Culture in International Relations, which is a two-day workshop, so a lot of the participants are here. And it brings together academics and practitioners and policymakers working in international cultural relations, our subject for the night. During the day, there are pretty specialized conversations, but this evening we open the conversation up to the broader public, which I am glad about because I'm certainly not a professional in cultural relations. For a bit of context, I am a journalist with a science background. I've been reporting on European culture and politics for the past 8 years for, among others, the podcast The Europeans. So many of you here will probably know a lot more about cultural relations than I do, but there are a lot of different perspectives in the room. So my hope is that I can ask some of the more basic, embarrassing questions to make sure we're still understanding each other if things get a little bit too jargony. And we were also all excited to see quite how many people are here, because obviously we're all interested in this subject, but I would bet to say that not this many people would have been here 5 years ago. So I'd love to hear more from you once we've started the panel conversation. But to focus on the evening, so why does culture matter in international relations, especially now when geopolitical tension is so palpably high and there's a lot of shifting power dynamics and competing values? There's plenty to say about that. I won't go into it just yet. But to start us off, before we start having more of an in-depth conversation, I would like to welcome Claske Vos. Claske is the initiator of the Future Pathways Workshop. She's also an anthropologist and an assistant professor at the European Studies Department of the University of Amsterdam. Her work focuses on lots of complicated things: the European cultural policy, EU funding, cultural activism, enlargement, and you have a particular expertise on Southeast Europe and questions of European identity. That is a lot to talk about. Good luck summing that up in 15 minutes. We asked Claske, who could obviously talk about many things, to help ground this discussion tonight historically and politically. So how we got here, what is at stake, and which dilemmas shape international cultural relations today. So I'll give you the floor to start us off.
Yeah, wonderful to see all of you here at SPI 25 to indeed discuss the value of culture for international relations, as Scott's already clearly announced. And it seems indeed more relevant than ever, even though I would say it has relevant, for a very, very long time. And quite some voices are heard that culture needs to be recognized as a key strategic pillar of EU external action. Yet, what does that entail? How to fully appreciate the value of culture in international relations. And it's my mission within 15 minutes, which is not completely easy, to really take you on a journey to provide you with some background on the topic, which will hopefully help us answer some of the questions. How do we actually move forward and what can be done on a European level? So I will take you on a journey. And I think I should have gone, yes, to the first slide, because it visualizes the journey I want to take with you over the historical landscape of Europe's global cultural action. And most important to this historical trajectory is that it reveals a development in which cultural diplomacy has become increasingly interconnected with cultural relations. I would argue that it's exactly this long-lasting attempt to interconnect cultural diplomacy with cultural relations, which is at the heart of the European Union's considerations, but also its struggles about the future of international cultural relations. So before we start our deep dive into history, I will first of all provide you with a bit more information about these core approaches to cultural action abroad. And as you might know, typical for cultural diplomacy is that it's an essentially interest-driven governmental practice by which often formal diplomats serving national governments try to shape and channel cultural flows to advance national interests. And in the early stages of Europe's history of global cultural action, cultural diplomacy was at the heart of most actions. National governments, because the European Union did not exist at that time, invested in culture to establish relationship with other countries which could help advance their interests. And of course, the European Union is not a national government. It brings together the voices of many European governments and several other institutional and non-institutional actors. Yet the European Union also uses culture as a so-called soft power, as a non-coercive means to influence the behavior of other parts in the world, which ultimately is in the interest of the European Union as a whole. So it's a form of cultural diplomacy. Cultural relations, on the contrary, do not seek to mobilize soft power or pursue strategic interests per se, but instead focusing on finding consensus by deliberating the internationalization agendas of several stakeholders. The idea is to really facilitate reciprocal, non-coercive, transnational interactions between state and non-state actors to develop shared normative frameworks that can help solve transnational and global problems. The importance of dialogue between several actors is emphasized as it would lead to lasting and stable cooperation. Now, as I just argued, typical for the early stages of European global cultural action, and in these early stages, as I already said, it was not the European Union that took action, but European states, was that it was primarily centered on cultural diplomacy. And I will zoom in on a few features of this history of cultural diplomacy, as these features have had a long-lasting impact on the more recent history of European Union global cultural action. First of all, it's a history entangled with colonialism. The roots of European cultural diplomacy lie in the late 19th century, and in this period, culture was used as a means to advance national interests in the colonies, often displaying large power asymmetries and an imposition of cultural norms, which can also be felt up to the present day. Second, the long history of cultural diplomacy in Europe exposes instances in which culture has been used as a form of propaganda. In particularly in the second decade of the 20th century, under influence of the First and later the Second World War, European governments actively invested in culture as a means to mobilize the masses, internally and externally. But also in the periods that followed, uses of culture for propaganda continued. Third, which can be seen as a response to this politicization of culture, it's a history entangled with notions of international conciliation and moral restoration. And again, in particular in the period after the Second World War, supranational organizations such as the Council of Europe and UNESCO challenged the politicization for culture for nationalist purposes. They emphasized the role culture could play in the promotion and maintenance of values, such as equality, democracy and human rights, and they again still do this up to the present day. Finally, the history of cultural diplomacy in Europe is entangled with geopolitics, notions of soft power, and reveals a continuous struggle with competing foreign policy agendas. When looking at the long history of cultural diplomacy, we see that geopolitical constellations hugely impact on how culture has been addressed. Despite the firm belief that culture could contribute to peace and security, several instances showed us how culture was placed at the center of fights over interests between global, regional and national powers. Now, I zoomed in on these historical features as they have a long-lasting impact on the field and still determine present-day considerations about the value for culture for international relations. For example, remnants of the colonial past can still be felt. Even though the nature and activities of national institutes for culture have also drastically changed, many of these institutes still take up central roles in the development and implementation of international cultural relations. Moreover, Western voices, in particular those of France, Germany and the UK, have largely determined the interpretation and institutional setup of international cultural relations. Propaganda also still impacts on international cultural relations. Russia's investments in misinformation and the erasures of markers of Ukrainian cultural identity are a case in point. But also how the far right in different parts of the world engages in cultural wars to attract certain constituencies. It raises questions about how the European Union should position itself in relation to these forces. How will it avoid using culture as another form of propaganda and send out a more inclusive message? Conciliation, moral restoration and values are also still central in present-day investments in the European Union's global cultural action. Partially because conflicts have been ongoing, but also because it's still seen as a central yet contested feature of the European Union, in which preserving peace, preventing conflicts and strengthening international security are still at the core of the Union's reason for existence. Finally, geopolitics, soft power, competing national interests still massively impact on the further development of European Union cultural action. It has become very clear in the past few years. While the US currently resorts from soft power and primarily focuses on military and economic power, cutting almost all funding in the field of culture, we see that the Gulf countries are doing the opposite and are investing massive amounts of money in culture, such as in Abu Dhabi's new Louvre Museum, or are investing massive amounts of money in sports events. So the European Union is now considering how to respond to all of this. How could it strategically invest in culture in these circumstances? And this brings me to the more recent history of European Union strategy for international cultural relations, which was launched officially in 2016, but has a longer history starting around 2004. What we see in this strategy is that the European Union aims to combine cultural diplomacy with cultural relations. This combination is typical for the European Union and is to some extent an outcome, I would say, of the nature of cultural collaboration within the European Union, bringing together a diverse range of actors operating on different levels of governance. What I mean by this becomes to some extent clear, I hope, when we look at a quote from Federica Mogherini, when she actually introduced the strategy of international cultural relations in 2016. What she said is, if we truly want to put culture at the core of our foreign policy, we need the whole Europe to get on board. On the one hand, she says our diversity is our strength, but she says we need all European actors to share the same sense of direction. Governments, regions, cities, but also cultural institutes, civil society organizations, artists, scientists, and performers. This, in a nutshell, shows how cultural diplomacy and cultural relations become intertwined. All stakeholders need to be involved. So having a dialogue, moving towards cultural relations. Yet they also all need to share the same sense of direction and work on a form of cultural diplomacy that can benefit Europe as a whole. And this movement between cultural diplomacy and cultural relations was already felt when the first steps were taken to include culture in EU foreign policy. There was a need for dialogue between the different actors involved, cultural relations, but also for a clear agenda driven by European Union interests, cultural diplomacy. And this last part, how investments in culture can help achieve EU interests, is also very visible in the most recently published Cultural Compass. As is stated in this compass, in an era of rapid and complex change, geopolitical tensions, foreign information manipulation and interference, anti-democratic movements, the climate crisis, technological shifts, and the digital transition, Europe must recognize and harness culture's potential to confront these pressing issues. So it reveals how the European Union sees culture as a means to help tackle these issues, as a form of soft power. Yet the European Union also realizes that it cannot do this without cultural relations. And this was already announced at an earlier stage in 2019, when the European Council stated that there's a need for an approach actually driven by a new spirit of dialogue, mutual understanding and learning, which entails the cooperation of local stakeholders and civil society levels at all levels and on an equal footing. So only by also investing in cultural relations, the European Union can further strengthen its position as a soft power and thus strengthen its cultural policy. But what does that mean in practice? How to combine this need for more horizontal collaboration with the need to work on a more powerful European stance? And this brings us back right at the present. What can we learn from the historical journey that we've just made. How to successfully combine cultural diplomacy with cultural relations and overcome the challenges ahead. I would argue that there are a few things that stand out. First of all, it seems that if the European Union wants to create and secure a stable basis for long-term relations with its partners in Africa, Asia, and South America, it needs to find a way to deal with its colonial legacies that still impact on international cultural relations. So the question to ask is the European Union actually able to really decenter itself and open up for different approaches and allow for more equal relationships, while at the same time strengthening its positioning on the world stage as a defender of values? Moreover, it seems that the European Union needs to find better ways to mediate between the several actors and their visions on the value of culture for international relations. The recent Cultural Compass, that strategy, states, to remain resilient and credible, the European Union must acknowledge and respond to the fragile geopolitical landscape by reinforcing its value-driven approach in its international cultural relations. But how to do this in times in which other EU policy fields very often take priority, when financial support remains low, and when other political actors, both internally and externally, take radically different approaches? So how to move forward? And here we slowly move towards our debate that's going to follow afterwards. Well, one step forward seems to be to bring different actors together, to slow down and to further invest in the establishment of long-lasting cultural relations. This means really opening up and daring to invest in diverse forms of international cultural relations and open up for different approaches that are grounded in local needs and reveal shared authorship. Changing patterns that have dominated cultural diplomacy is a very difficult and long process, but it needs to be undertaken. Another step forward seems to be to create the circumstances for inclusive cultural relations, meaning investing in trust, safety, fairness and equality. And again, this is by no means an easy task, and particularly in a world in which power asymmetries, inequality and suppression, and often particularly the culture and art scenes are the target of this, dominate the field. Perhaps the European Union could act as a kind of enabler. So in this case, not a force that imposes approaches to culture, but it would entail moving even more towards cultural relations, sending out a different message than international counterparts are doing, such as the US, China, Russia, and the Gulf states. Yet the European Union can only do this when it's provided with the tools to function as such an enabler. Culture should be taken much more seriously as an important feature of the European Union's foreign policy, and a move has to be made from a strategy to an actionable plan, which allows for the development of an institutional structure, including sufficient financial support. It also means that the European Union becomes a real partner and that it decenters itself, that it truly allows for different voices and dares to change some of its frameworks rooted in a long history of cultural diplomacy. I want to conclude this introduction, which hopefully gave you this bird-eyed view of what we're talking about here, by providing an example of what this could look like by actually showing you a film. And it's a film made by Historias en Kilómetros, a community-based filmmaking lab based in Colombia. And Paola Diaz-Gomez is actually here with us in the room, who has been a very important actor behind this film. The film is one of their current projects and was born from a shared question. How can the diverse experiences of the Global South, historically rendered often invisible by external gazes, be woven into a single story, a single narrative in order to believe again? This story was conceived by 6 community film production teams across 3 continents. And here, I hope I pronounced this correctly, Paola: Ibagué, Tierra Grata, Serete, and Tumaco in Colombia, Latin America, Kakuma in Kenya, Africa, and Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, Asia. Over several months, these teams came together to collectively shape one shared narrative. Each speaks from different territories, yet from deeply similar struggles. Together, they propose a creative response that unites them. Art not only as a way forward, but as a shared practice, a craft through which to believe again. So this short film, Believe Again, does not only connect territories, it unifies the forces of the Global South into a transcontinental narrative, planting the seed of a new way of telling stories from this part of the world. So I conclude with this film today because I think it's a beautiful example of how cultural practice grounded in local needs and shared authorships can come into being. It's an example of how to move forward, tackle shared international challenges such as conflict, and work towards more inclusive approaches to culture. Thank you, and I hope you're going to enjoy the film before we move.
One, two, three.
Then okay.
The teacher said that we shall not play with anyone who speaks the mother tongue.
You will remain behind if you don't stop speaking that barbaric language. You are good for nothing.
Mama, okay, Mama. Can we get Jenny?
Quite a bit. Tramada yet, Shankar. Did you look up?
Cuando era muy niña, hubo mucho conflicto por parte de los paramilitares. Y a raíz de eso, mis padres tomaron la decisión de irse de nuestros territorios ancestrales.
Nací acá. Luego quedé sola, entonces quedé con 5 hijos. No tenía un trabajo estable porque salí por causa del conflicto armado. Tuvimos muchos percances.
Y siempre me queda en la mente, queremos recuperar nuestros territorios ancestrales, donde crecimos nosotros por nuestra parte de nuestros abuelos.
Pues yo a los 13 años dejé de estudiar y empecé a trabajar en la casa, a apoyar. También tuve mi pasado que fue vender. También consumí todo tipo de vicio, pues no me siento orgulloso. Eso fue cuando mi hermano ahí lo cerraron, o sea, cayó en la calle.
Uno siempre piensa, a esta edad, siempre piensa como qué voy a hacer con mi vida o qué voy a hacer para un futuro. No hay oportunidades o en sí no se apoya lo que es el arte. Eso es lo que realmente me aterra. Enfocarme en algo lo cual para un futuro no me va a funcionar, no me va a servir.
Kendileri uçtiydi zilhamida soruyoruz. Kuar hamida dünyar degün tumra fulan siyahas. Lokal fuende yasamasta haminulay akansa. Eto minne toy bado ara de to forso gori bado to in mal karam hom. Dali bado to জিনিসপত্রের অভাব টাকার অভাব কুয়ারের অভাবে উনি হাসতুন এরিয়ার ফয়েন্দি হাসপাতাল নসিকে বাইরে অন্য হাসপাতাল তারা যায় তুলগোমা টাকা করে আপুদিন চুড়িলি তারা জিনিস বাইরে দিতে
ব্রত অনন্তরে সতর্ক করি প্রমাণ ব্রতের সংকল্প করি আসলে ইসলাম বুধুগণে বলে সাধু লক্ষ্মী ব্রত ছাড় সকলে মিলিয়ে করে প্রতিগুণবার
Esas voces cercanas de nosotros que nos empiezan a decir como esto de hacer arte. Date cuenta que eso no te genera una estabilidad. Estudiar medicina o estudiar veterinaria o ponerse a estudiar abogacía. Te puede generar a ti una estabilidad laboral. Arte, eso es un pasatiempo. Ponle mucha seriedad a tus otras obligaciones.
Mama, ada. Ada ke jalan tu mana ngai? Dia ada. Saya orang jalan tu dia ngai. Tenang dulu, kau dulu. Mengenai mana dia bukan muka, mengenai free kesia muka. Ngai dia tu dulu kasih ngai. Bila kamu mereka dikonflik kita, pada dia na, siapa kita ni kerja begitu, kurang.
La resistencia es lo que obviamente a nosotros nos marca día a día y que tenemos que resistir, insistir y persistir. Y con algo muy importante que nosotros tenemos que tener claro es el tema de fe, de que aunque yo me caiga, tengo que sí o sí levantarme, que así sea con lágrimas en los ojos, con el corazón partido, con mis situaciones y mis dificultades, nosotros día a día tenemos que hacerlo.
Viste, te caíste, te lo dije. No escuchas, no haces caso. ¿Qué pasa?
Hacer teatro en este país es resistir. En este país todo está hecho para que no exista el teatro. La estructura política y nuestra organización o la forma como se lleva a cabo no está hecha para que el teatro exista. De hecho, hacer teatro es resistir, es una voz de resistencia.
El arte se convierte en una excusa es para transformar la vida en esos entornos en los cuales ellos no encuentran un modo de poder contribuir a sus vidas, de poder crear un proyecto de vida porque se encuentran inmersos en medio de la violencia, en medio de conflictos sociales que les hace pensar que no tienen un sueño por cumplir, que no hay esperanza en este mundo.
Esta experiencia pues nos llevó a que había una necesidad también de contar territorios. Y entre esas cosas fuimos descubriendo que lo que se callaba a veces era lo más importante.
Empezamos comprando cosas, como ejemplo iniciamos con el estudio. Después del estudio con la silla, mesa, el arreglo. Y ahí fue donde empezó todo.
Yo vine acá porque yo lo vi bailando. Después, cuando supe que aquí también había composiciones de rap, yo también empecé a venir a las composiciones de rap. Ya agarré más confianza. Entonces yo llegué y le pedí permiso al profesor de baile para que yo estuviera bailando y el profesor dijo que sí. Mi proceso en Cali empezó principalmente como bailarina urbana. Por medio del baile, pues empecé en la parte teatral, la parte artística, y de ver a los demás zanqueros fue lo que me dejó aprender tango.
Todo mueve la cabeza hacia arriba y hacia abajo, con las luces, le van a dar un poco de vida a lo que le está proponiendo, sí.
El arte de una persona, sea empírica, sea que haya estudiado una carrera, o sea, el arte se expresa de muchas maneras. Duérmete, mi niño, color de abejón, tu mami, la rata, tu papi, el ratón.
Azar bozultun furun haziver söyleyiz. Şirketi babattun, ibe şirketi ibe babattun. En dilegori, gusti, sin haziver söyleyiz.
Y así como nosotros hemos ido cambiando poco a poco esa narrativa. Sí se puede vivir del arte, sí se puede vivir de hacer cine, sí se puede vivir de la cultura.
Yo creo que ahí es donde nosotros estamos llegando, aportando a romper esa brecha, a romper esa barrera y hacerlos pensar que un proyecto de vida sí es posible desde el arte, la cultura y la educación.
Me hace sentir libre, lejos de preocupaciones. De la misma manera, cuando estoy aquí, montando esta web, como que me centro en lo que estoy haciendo y me olvido de todo lo que está pasando a mi alrededor.
Las comunidades, al apropiarse de la historia, también se apropie de esa fuerza, de ese sí se puede hacer.
Que somos más que narcotráfico, prostitución y drogadicción y muertes violentas por diferentes actores del conflicto, sino que dentro de ese mismo conflicto también se dan unas narrativas bien interesantes y sirven como radiografía para que otras personas a nivel del planeta conozcan el cine que se hace desde otro aspecto.
Otras personas se sienten felices, les gusta lo que hacemos y de la misma manera podemos inspirar a otras personas a querer hacer.
Pero paren de soñar y que si en algún momento se sienten tristes, que brindan una canción, en un dibujo que expresen la ira o el sentimiento que tienen en ese momento. मेरे हाथ बोल मिनटल हाथ गोरर मैं बोई मरतोइन बेगुन एकुमारे आराधना बिया हा खुदासाई तलमा हलमा आरा फारदानशी आमिलिया दरिलाकी.
Lili está dando lo mejor de ella para que sus hijos cumplan los sueños que ellos quieran y que sigan adelante y tengan la mejor oportunidad que ha dejado Lili para ellos.
Y pues yo le he mostrado mucho a los niños de que nunca tienen que dejar de soñar, que les sigan, de que si pueden, que si yo pude cantar, ella también puede cantar, yo no puedo cantar, usted también puede cantar, todo, desde que lo propongan se puede. চেষ্টা করলে এবার রাখা যায় নতুন গোষ্ঠী বানাতর এহামত আইবল্লা বলি আগ্রহ তৈয়ার হই আমরা বাঁচে থাকিলে আমরা পর থাকিব de এসিয়া.
Así creamos una trinchera de esperanza para poder sobrevivir en este mundo que día a día nos satura con guerras, nos satura con indiferencia. Este es un proceso de transformación constante. Hacer cine comunitario es tocar estas fibras y llevarlas a una escala universal.
Mamá, ¿para qué lo hago?
Join together and we're going to create a story, all of us here.
Hemos visto toda la similitud que hay, ¿no? Todas las todo el corazón que nos une a todos los que estamos acá. Entonces es un espacio sobre todo para disfrutar este momento, para disfrutar de estos puentes que estamos haciendo y para celebrar lo que nos une.
We have to admit and show the world that how people from different countries have the same type of struggle.
La resistencia la normaliza y la ve como un acto naturalizado y cotidiano, pero eso no es normal. Existir no debiera ser el pan de cada día de nosotros como pueblo y nosotros como comunidad.
Vengo buscando riqueza ni fama. El sol brilla más cuando tu alma no rama. La gente corre detrás de un sueño que engaña, pero ya encontré la paz que me acompaña. No importa el dinero ni las cosas que poseo. La felicidad está en el alma, no en lo que veo. Vivir con amor es el mayor deseo. Felicidad.
Thank you for choosing this film. I feel like we should applause, but obviously they're not going to receive it. But yeah, thank you so much for curating this film, because I think it grounds us really well in an example of international cultural relations, and also reminds us about the rest of the world, because obviously while we're talking about that, we're sitting here in Amsterdam and sometimes the rest of the world feels far away. So yes, I think that started us off really well to introduce the panelists. I'd love to have you join me up here. I am very pleased to welcome our three panelists this evening. We have Lars Ebert, the Secretary General of Culture Action Europe, the interest and advocacy group for culture at the EU level. Here we go. Then we have Lin Fu, independent curator and producer based between Shanghai and New York. And I could give a much longer list of your work because there's plenty of it, as is true for everyone here. And we have Aya Kasasa, who is an expert in cultural affairs and international partnerships, formerly with the Organization of African, Caribbean and Pacific States. Aya is now an independent consultant and serves as a jury member at UNIC's Space of Culture program. If you guys feel like I missed any very important parts of your work, please feel free to add it. There are also 3 microphones here that I would love to supply you with. And while we're getting settled in, we were all pretty amazed at how many people are here. And while I have plenty of questions to ask, I would love it if people in the audience would contribute with either questions or things they're thinking about. Maybe starting off while we're landing, maybe a couple of people could tell us what brought them here this evening. Would anyone like to share with us what brought them here this evening? Thank you.
What was already shown, I think, in the beginning. Whoa. I think
yes. Could you speak into the microphone? Thank you so much.
Yeah, but this is awful echo. I think that this is a moment where a lot of bullshit has to go. So what I find very pleasant is that in so many places people are just standing up doing things and starting to connect and reconnect and retell stories and redevise relationships despite all the shock that's going on. And I think the more places where this is being expressed, the better.
Great, thank you. Would anyone else like to share what brought them here this evening? Otherwise, we will move on. Thank you. And like I said, feel free to ask questions at any moment. Oh, yes, and we were going to have one fourth panelist, Eugene Downs, and I would like to give a small mention to him in the Ministry of Culture from Ireland, and he couldn't join us this evening for personal circumstances. And what that does mean that we have a lot more time to rack your brains. But one perspective that we're missing is, I think, sometimes we make the mistake of talking about the EU as a monolith, and obviously it's not, or Europe. That's already two different things. And I think speaking with someone from Ireland exposes that more acutely because of the way that different countries have been responding to the political tensions that we have now. So that's not a perspective that we have in our panel this evening as much as I would like, but we've got plenty of other ones, and maybe some of the people in the audience can bring that in. Let's get started. All right, setting the stakes. Culture is often framed as a force for peace, dialogue, and sustainable development, which are a lot of big words. But it's also increasingly part of geopolitical competition and soft power. And I'm wondering, feel free anyone to answer this, whoever's the most keen. How should Europe position itself in that landscape, that very complicated landscape? And what are the main risks and opportunities?
Okay, I feel a gaze on me.
Go for it.
That's, of course, an impossible question to answer.
I know.
But I mean, I'll take up a few of the terms that you've mentioned to unpack. Maybe a term that we've heard more often today is the term soft power, and maybe we should stop using that and just talk about power. And someone else in my group, that we had this workshop already today, and I was in one group where it was mentioned that maybe instead of power we should talk about influence. And culture is so influential and in many aspects, and if we talk about power, we might want to talk about culture as a hard power as well. We heard it earlier in Klaske's presentation. I mean, Russia spends billions of euros in propaganda to tell a certain story about the brutal war of aggression in Ukraine. And we spend, I don't know, a few million on international cultural collaboration within Europe. So how do we want to counter these narratives if we see culture as a hobby? That was also presented earlier. So I think we require much more fundamental rethinking of culture, and that's not only on a policy level, but on a broader societal level. The other term I want to pick up is the sustainability. Because I think it brings us to a international agenda that we've been playing to for many years, the Sustainable Development Goals, 17 Sustainable Development Goals, of which we thought they might help us save the planet. And culture was not in them. It was never part of the equation. And the argument was, as in many other cases, and I guess also now in terms of what kind of power does culture have, culture is transformative in itself. It is part of all the other parts. Culture is part of, of health and well-being. Culture is part of how we tell our stories, cook, dance, laugh, stand up in the morning, dress. It's all culture, and yet there's no particular view on what enables cultural production to root out in all areas of life. Well, that sustainable development agenda we've lost because it's connected to a notion of multilateralism that is basically going down the drain at this moment. And if we look at how it might look like after 2030 when this sustainable development agenda ends, we encounter a possibility of a multilateral landscape in which the United Nations don't exist anymore. And if I talk to my coalition partners on a global level how to advocate for something that basically doesn't have a playing field anymore, we debate thoughts like, we might not be able to talk about democracy, human rights, a lot of values that are European values and maybe not necessarily shared everywhere in the world, but now minority values that are not even mentioned in a post-2030 discussion at all anymore. So we are recalibrating in a way that that is more disorienting than anything we've experienced before.
Thank you. I really appreciate you raising words, because I mean, things like what does even a democracy mean is something we could have a whole evening on, because I think different people often understand different things with the same words. Lynn, I see you nodding enthusiastically, and to tie into what we just heard, to deepen that and get a bit more specific, we recently have seen a new era of geopolitics in action, and Canada just signed a trade deal with China that explicitly includes cultural relations. And I wonder what you think about that and what Europe might be able to learn from that.
Yeah, this is a great question. So first I have to say, because I just flew in from New York yesterday, and I'm like super jet lagged now. So my brain might go blank any minute. So I really like this question. Actually, I'm not super familiar of that trade, of the treaty that's signed between China and Canada. But interestingly, this actually reminded me of very recently, I think just like 2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister of the UK just visited China, and instead, like, he brought over a delegation of about over 50 people. And this delegation, the list of the delegates are open resources that you can go online and see who these people are. And so I checked, and surprisingly, instead of usually you have all the, the big CEOs and big bosses of the top companies, these industry people, but in that delegation list, you actually see a lot of people from arts and cultural field, and you see people from the National Theatre, from the Royal Shakespeare Company, and all the major museums in the UK. And when I saw that list, and then I started to believe what the Prime Minister say, this visit that he's making to China is trying to develop a more sophisticated relationship with China. And then he aims to do that through culture. And then, because I used to work for British Council for many years, so during that 4-day official visit, my WeChat is like the #1 social media platform in China. My WeChat was, half of the posts were all about his visit. Like he's, having this conversation with Rosamund Pike, which is an award-winning British actress who adopted a Chinese name for herself. And then, and she also told the Prime Minister, oh, you should also have a Chinese name if you want to really deal with China. So I would say this is actually really gives like this very clear message that cultural relations has now, really been placed in a crucial position as part of the diplomatic or economic ecosystem. And I think dealing with a country like China, it might be quite effective because, in China, a lot of things are top-down. So if you're, for a country, if you want to develop a good diplomatic relationship with China, starting from there, it's great because it can set this whole stable tone that might lead to more exchange and communication and collaboration in the civil society level later. But I don't know if it applies to all countries because, different countries have different circumstances. But I would say for the UK, so far, so great, because I already seen Matilda, this Royal Shakespeare Company production, has just kicked off like a 6 months big touring across the whole country, the major cities in China that will apparently attract many audiences to the theater. And also the NT Live, which is a high-resolution recording of the National Theatre productions, and they have been distributed as films across different theaters in China that have, attracted millions of, not in millions, but like really huge number of audience that I would say, this is a great example. Probably part of cultural diplomacy and slowly moving towards cultural relations, depending on how it's conducted.
There's a lot of things I would like to ask you more on about that, starting with what a sophisticated relationship means, what you hear there. But before I go there, I would love to ask you, Aya, because I feel like Europe often speaks about the words partnership, but there are a lot of different power dynamics going on. Also, for example, as you mentioned, Europe has not necessarily invested as much in culture. On the other hand, it holds all kinds of different power. There's a lot of different power dynamics happening. And I wonder what you think it takes for cultural cooperation to be genuinely respectful of those differences and create more agency and fairness for all partners.
Thank you. Hello to everybody. I think what's apart from what was already said, I think we needed to. We used, this panel here as part of a workshop, and this afternoon we talked about responsibility. I think we have the responsibility to not shy away from the fact that we cannot have cultural relations and talking about international cultural relations when we are shying away from talking about migration, for instance. I've been working for an international organization where many of our activities were just not, we weren't capable to help them because people could not come because of visas. We should talk about the fact that if we talk about migration that much, without recognizing all the lies that are behind that it's used as a political tool, let's use culture with the same force. Let's force the politicians, let's force our stakeholders to talk about culture as much as we talk about migration, but with the real word behind. I think this is very important to have a truly genuine conversation between us, because we can talk about culture as much as we want. If we lie, if we allow those lies to be at the front pages of our medias, etc., we won't get there.
And you talk about lies. If you could ask whatever you wanted to whoever you wanted, what lies would you be confronting most directly?
That migrants are coming are coming massively to Europe. It's not true. The great burden of migration, it's within the African countries. It's really marginal what's happening. But what's happening is that people are dying on the seas, and we don't even talk about that anymore. So for me, we need to link this cultural relation, international cultural relation debate to what's also happening in all those other spheres, and take this as an entry point in order to talk about what really matters, which is if you don't, you want my craft, you want my culture, but you don't want me. It needs to be addressed.
Absolutely, thank you. I'm always amazed, it's a very different field, but coming from journalism, how much cultural stereotypes shape these completely unfounded, unfactual things, even in high up editorial rooms. So I really appreciate what you just said. I also want to quickly turn to the audience to see if anyone is ready to say anything. Yes. Is there a microphone that can be? Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, I want to link up with what Lars just said about SDGs. And it brought up the idea to make our own SDGs as Europe. And how would you suggest that culture could be part of that? And in what way could you form that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Again, challenging, but I would like to pick up two things that were said earlier. First of all, probably the role of civil society that you mentioned. The limitations in Europe, and probably we can extrapolate that to the world in a way, is that there's no international cultural competence. Or well, the cultural competence of the EU is very, very limited to transnational exchange and transnational cooperation, and maybe to awarding the title of a cultural capital twice a year. That's it, you know, and there's a very tiny budget attached to that, because all the member states are afraid that their cultural autonomy might be taken away. And in a way, there's a funny cycle, because the whole cultural policy term was coined more or less by the UNESCO in the 50s, when everyone was afraid that globalization would take away national identity. And now we are bringing it back to define something that might overcome national identity. So there's a conundrum there which we need to be aware of.
Can I just butt in and ask what you mean by cultural autonomy?
I mean that now at the moment cultural policy is made at member state level. In federal states like in Germany, it's even made on a lower level, and in some other contexts it's at the lowest possible administrative level. And so there's no cultural policy in Europe that would regulate how the Paris Opera is funded. That's a French thing or a Parisian thing. So we can only work through transnational collaboration. But what is funny or remarkable to see is that somehow civil society has used that mechanism to collaborate across borders in Europe in the last, I don't know how many years since the Creative Europe program exists, to create something that I would call a contemporary European culture that is beyond any notion of national identity, and that we still don't grasp as a full power of Europe that doesn't interfere in the cultural competencies of a member state. And I would say that maybe we can take that example. First, we take that example serious in Europe, which we don't, because the EU is shying away from it. I think, for instance, that Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the College of Commissioners, doesn't engage, doesn't support the cultural compass, for instance, or whatever we would like to see also in international cultural relations, is the fact that she's afraid of the member states. Because when the member states hear culture, they tick us on the fingers and no, it's our thing, away. And I think, okay, it's your thing, do your thing, you know, support culture in the way you want to support it in Luxembourg, great. But there's something that kind of transgresses that national notion. And civil society has shaped that. Not any institutional policymakers. It's civil society that has developed that in the last decades. And in my view, we should look at something similar on a global level. Like how can we build up structures that civil society actors collaborate across borders, as we've seen in the movie, to generate something not necessarily that is global culture, but that is an ethos of collaboration across value systems that then transgresses national or maybe even policies of blocks, because we are speaking of blocks again, which is again dangerous. But I would hope that's, long answer short. I don't believe in maybe necessarily something institutional, but the power of civil society shows us where possibilities are. Sorry to evade your answer.
Mm-hmm. Lynn, I'm curious, because sometimes the easiest way to see yourself more clearly is if someone else is looking from the outside in, and I'm wondering how you look at European cultural policy, looking from New York, looking from Shanghai. Are there any concrete things we could adjust to respond to some of these issues?
European cultural policy, because, well, I've been to Europe many times, and mostly is west part of Europe, like France, Germany, the UK, if it's still counted, and Italy, Spain, and also in China, because I work in the performing arts, so when theaters or festivals, they, tour European works to China, and I would say a lot of the times it's the works from these countries I just mentioned, because probably they have a better funding structure that can support, the international travel, or just, these companies that have bigger names, directors or performers. And then 2 years ago, 2024, that's the very first time I made it to the Southeast Europe, and I visited Croatia and Bosnia and Montenegro. Then I realized, wow, Europe is huge. It's actually a lot of diversity, and then you can't say just like Europe, like this one word to to include everything. So I would say if there is like a agenda to develop a European whole EU cultural policy, I don't know. If to me it's like a mission impossible. But very importantly, I would say the key message is to recognize that diversity, like we mentioned earlier, is a strength, and it's rather than an obstacle. So if we do want to develop a cultural policy for European Union, it has to be something. It has to create a capacity to hold these differences together instead of to kind of divide all the diversity. So I don't know if it's doable. I don't have an answer for sure, but this is the key message, to see diversity as a strength.
Absolutely. I'd love to hear your response.
I don't have an answer neither, but I think also it's because I've seen all these different European policies for culture. I've been through also a time when culture was a negative priority. I don't know, priorité négative in Europe, because that happened. And I think what can be a way is to push for how are you going to implement this compass? I think it will be officially launched tomorrow, something like that. But then our work is to go there and to tell them what are the implementation mechanisms. Maybe we can construct them together, because okay, I think that the answer are lying from all over Europe, as you said, and also we have some experiences where we can build on, and it's really the implementation of these great ideas, these great policies, but how are you going to make it real on the ground and to use them as a tool? So this is a huge work that maybe it is something we can work together.
And I'm curious what concretely you would like to see done differently on the ground.
I think we are on the right path. For instance, with spaces of culture, I hope we will be able to talk about that. More and more, I think dialogue is there. More and more recognizing that maybe we should just go with what's already happening, and recognize that people know what they're doing, and that yes, funding is very important. I think it's money is key, but how we spend it and who's deciding how we spend it, this is something. It's moving, but we have to keep on pushing on being there and deciding together.
Yes.
Thank you. I had a question, I think, to all panel members, but mostly Mrs. Casassa. You mentioned that to approach cultural relations between countries, we mustn't shy away from difficult questions. I think a question that I think perhaps everyone in this room has is, how do we, in the lens of cultural relations, how do we approach our colonial history, colonial legacy? Is it enough to just send back stolen artifacts? Must there be more to it? Yeah, thank you.
I think it's not an easy question, and it is something that we all have to take responsibility again of. I mean, at least just starting by recognizing what happened and recognizing that it's very hard for people that has been colonized to get out from all those frames. Funding goes with some legacy from colonialism. When we recognize it, can we just speak about it and make sure that it's not happening again in the way we disperse funds and in the ways where we actually, I come from programming in culture, from programming, monitoring, etc., at least in the way we are programming the funds, etc., and those big programs, those big projects, I think it lies in the process. Maybe some other...
Yeah, I think it somehow relates to the compass, about which I think we will talk a bit more in a bit. But you asked about how this compass is implemented, and one of the indicators of it.
Can I just quickly ask you to tell us what the compass is?
Okay, I will in a second. Ooh, that's a long story. It's the most current strategy of the European Commission about culture.
Okay, thank you. Very good job.
Nutshell. But how serious they take it will be measured by the amount of money they put to it. And how that money will be distributed relates to your question. Like, if, for instance, something like the Creative Europe program, which we hope will still exist in the new, under the new budget of the EU, we would hope that projects that would involve partners from outside Europe would create funding opportunities so that partners across the world can access the funding in the same way to, for instance, run a decolonial project. And that is not the case at the moment. And there are legal proposals at the table at the moment that look like it might not be the case in the future, which we have to battle. This is the fight that we need to fight at the moment. How can we access the money in a fair way? And then we can put deeds to our words when we talk about decolonization.
I was also curious to see what you would say, but it sounds like you are just agreeing. Is there anyone else? Yes.
I have a question about the obsession for Europe. Oh, my name is Merapi Obermeier. I have a question about the obsession for the European people about uniqueness. Because that destroys a lot of cultural relationship. And I have a very good example about France, because France once asked to have an exhibition from the Chinese soldiers who were found in the mountains in China. And all the soldiers transported. And then, of course, it was a very good idea. They brought soldiers, but then it turns out that the soldiers were not unique. They were made, remade, and in the same way. So they looked like very much unique. But someone said, no, they are not the real one. And France became very angry because it was not unique. But the problem was that they didn't understand that for China, it was not the uniqueness what was important, but the story. That was important, the story. So so it created a problem between the relationship, the cultural relationship between different cultures, and that is what I think we also have to think about. The ideas about what people think about what is culture, what is the essential part of what we're thinking. And also, the obsession for uniqueness creates also a situation that we really want to have things. You know, stealing things, and also the way of thinking. For example, the evolution. The way we think about the evolution that goes far away, it was a part of the Tao, the Chinese Tao, but it was not written. It was the basic thinking of the Chinese, but we always learned at school that it came from Darwin. So there are many different things. So we have to think about this obsession and stealing and. You know, because yeah, I'm sorry.
No, please don't apologize.
I can give a lot of examples for it, but I don't do it.
I'm sure. No, I'm glad to have some audience participation. But if I distill your question a bit, what I get from it is, and correct me if I'm wrong, why is Europe so obsessed with uniqueness, and maybe what should we focus on instead? Yeah. Lynn, I would love to hear your response to that. If you're
why Europe is so obsessed with uniqueness.
Maybe Europe would have to say that, and I don't know who would be the
know?
answer. But I would love to hear maybe, what we should be focusing on instead.
I think you just mentioned is the stories behind it that's matter, because I don't know about the uniqueness of thing, or maybe it's like a replica. If it's a replica, it doesn't matter anymore, or because sometimes for some exhibitions, maybe because of some financial reason, and we can only exhibit replicas. But if it's like very well curated, very well done, and the stories are like very well told, it has value. It still matters. So I don't know, this kind of obsession with uniqueness of you just want to see this one and only one piece, and then if it's a replica, it doesn't matter anymore. But for me, I think also like the work I do, I think what matters is always the stories and the people who tell the stories behind that.
Thank you. And I do recognize a little bit of what you mean in the obsession with uniqueness, actually also from my science background. I feel like there was a lot of focus on from the colonial perspective that also spread into science of like really trying to demonstrate like humans are unique in this way. So there's a deep history of that. Like I would say that's behind this whole obsession with opposable thumbs. And then we're just very keen to prove like this is unique and superior. And I
don't know, just like jump in. Probably it relates to individualism, because
exactly.
Growing up in China, I was educated in a pretty much collective way, like, what the group wants is what you want. You just don't want to be different from others. So this is that's why in terms of pursuing uniqueness is not really something, for me, it's like something that stands out. Yeah, but I think this is quite interesting. It probably relates to something deeper culturally.
Absolutely. Yes.
Sorry, because I'm behind the pillar, you didn't see me.
Sorry, I didn't see you.
Sorry. The question was brilliant. As an outsider looking in, and I've always been the other, and looking at Europe, and obviously for my accent, I'm based in the UK. But one of the things I find really interesting is just quite how colonized Europeans are. And it's really interesting to see the awakening. I'm definitely going to do, just watch. Because a lot of communities around the world had to do a lot of work to be able to decolonize themselves. So welcome. So if you want to know more, read some books about Black authors and other cultures. Everything is there, all the work has been done, and we're going to be in a really better place when we can actually all start to talk to each other from the same lived experience. So it feels troublesome now. The civil rights movement didn't happen because they were making it up. So, enjoy the pain, but, we're all now in it together. But on a more practical point of view, it's just got to really emphasize the fact that we do have to understand, we were talking about it today at the workshop, we have to understand the mechanics of colonialism in order to come up with a framework for decolonialism. And God, I've lost my train, sorry. But more than anything else, let's just finish this. Let's just be happy to know that at least the awakening is happening. Because as an outsider, having grown up in Europe and watching the kind of asleep sort of weirdness has been incredibly terrifying. And now that I can actually have these conversations, it actually feels incredibly encouraging. So please don't think that this quake is negative. Everyone seems to be so upset about it. From my point of view, it's brilliant.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. I just want to ask one more question that's tied into this, because you mentioned the European spaces of culture, where you were a jury member or are a jury member. And I would be really curious to hear you talk a little bit more about what that program reveals about the current Africa-Europe cultural cooperation.
Maybe after the, I think there is a presentation on the program or not?
No, but I would love to hear a short summary on what it is.
Okay, so I think that the European Spaces of Culture initiative is particularly interesting because it's really a deliberate shift in how the EU approaches international cultural relations, and especially with Africa. For the others part of the world, my colleagues here will be able to talk about it. I mean, we are getting away from exporting European culture, deciding what's culture, how it should look like, and what can be considered as a good culture, what is beautiful and meaningful, etc. And it's actually having some creative spaces of co-creation, you know, where you've got EU stakeholders, but also cultural actors jointly responding to needs that has been locally identified in African countries. From my perspective, what stands out is really the way the program is giving space to process. I think once you've started agreeing to fund some projects and some program where you are actually giving space to cultural practitioners just to practice, you know that you've made a big jump. I stop here and maybe we can talk about later.
Thank you. Something that captures me in what you're saying, and also I'm not sure what your name is, but what you just said, is it does feel like there's a different chapter happening in the unraveling of colonialism, and I appreciate that that's also exciting. Like it feels hard and scary, but it's also very exciting. And I was wondering, Lars, where you maybe feel some more excitement or potential in this moment when we're all on a little bit unsteady ground and things are moving, but maybe also open things up.
It's up to me to give hope now.
No, I'm more curious specifically from this. The fun thing when things move and are unstable is that something can shift. And I'm wondering what would make you feel hopeful that would open up more concretely.
Okay.
But don't worry, hope is not on your shoulders.
Yeah. Can I take it as the opportunity to get back to the compass?
Sure.
because I think it does open things up at the moment. I think the cultural compass, which is the strategy of the European Union at the moment when it comes to culture, it will be accompanied by a work plan for culture from the member states at the end of this year, is the most ambitious cultural strategy that the European Union ever had. Now we need to make sure that people work with it, start to work with it and put money to it. But what I find really the perspective that I think it offers for our conversations here is that it recognizes, it uses very sloganish headings, so that's maybe a bit stupid, but so the two slogans are Europe for Culture, Culture for Europe, are the two main headings with which it opens. But what that really says, if you unpack it and if you read it, is that the Union recognizes that there's a foundational role of culture, which is an undebatable part of all of our societies, and that is just there to be there. It is nothing, no problem solving, no transformation, no aggregation, nothing. It's just we need to support culture because that makes who we are. Like education, healthcare, it's something that each society needs. It also has its own part of an economy. It's not on a market. It's something that we foster because it makes us humans. It transgresses us through time and space into something that makes it worth living. It's where our imagination comes from for a better future. It gives us agency as democratic beings. It's the foundation. And the other one, that's Europe for culture. And then the other one, Culture for Europe, recognizes the fact that with artists working with kids, we can help transform human beings into better beings. We can help transform healthcare systems into more human systems. We can help transform exploitational relationships in the world into more just relationships. We can help transform wrong images of our histories into less wrong images of our histories. We can enter contested spaces in which we can hold pain, in which pain is maybe not joyful unless, you know, I can imagine situations to enjoy pain, but in which you know, we can know we walk through pain because we will create something that we cannot yet imagine, and that we are in spaces that might be that we might call third spaces, in which we don't need to solve a problem, but in which we can stay with trouble to you know, use the famous quote. That's the transformational power of culture. So when the compass says Culture for Europe and Europe for Culture, it recognizes both forms, and that hasn't been the case so far. We've been trying to invest in that mainstream, that transformative role, so because that gave us arguments to politicians to say, look, culture creates jobs. Look, culture is good for our health. We can save money if we need less antidepressants and better give it to artists. I don't know. We've used all these arguments, and yet it has never helped us to position culture, and so strongly position culture. And now this document comes and says, no, there are two aspects to it. So I'm not so sure how we can, so to speak, monetize it or work with that in a way that really helps us. But never before has there been an official document that has been so outspoken. So I would say we better use it now.
I'm very curious to see where that goes. And listening to you speak, I realize in some ways two things, that both maybe in this way culture becomes more something that works for us instead of, because it's going to be there, as you say, whether we admit it or not. Like, there is no such thing as a group of people with no culture. That would be strange. And I also, listening to you talk, I also think about, like, is it really honest that Europe hasn't focused a lot on culture? Like, maybe it's in a different section of policy, like the protection of different French cheeses, I would argue, has some kind of a cultural element, but we've put it in a different section of politics. So listening to you talk, I think maybe that's also part of it, a more honest relationship with how important culture is. I thought that you wanted to say something. I would love to hear you add.
Yeah, and maybe to go back to the spaces, it's also, as a jury member, it's also a space where there's a growing recognition of asymmetries. We can talk about it, you know. We can suffer together. We can you know, get into fights because we have there's this recognition of asymmetries in resources, in mobility, definitely, you know, in decision making, but in the framework of this program, we can attempt to do something, to do something about it. And I think that's where it's important, and that's where it actually serves also the compass. And it could be, you know, I was talking about implementation. Some things are already happening. That's why.
Lynn, I'm curious how you would, obviously, it's not like a new concept to deal with these asymmetries and talking across different stakeholders, and I'm curious what concrete tools you've found are helpful in that.
Well, because we talked a little bit about that, the power asymmetries. There's actually this whole session dedicated to that topic this morning. Well, I think there's something very important for me is the fact that power asymmetries exist. It is a reality, so it is not something that we can erase, unfortunately. So there's always power asymmetries everywhere, in different, in the cultural industry or everywhere in our life. So to take it as a reality, this is like a very important attitude, and then this is something that exists. You cannot really go about, but then how do you navigate that? And how do you, together with people your colleagues that you work with, how do you effectively navigate that and make the project work? So, like, there are, many concrete examples. So, for example, I would say probably like 20 or 30 years ago, maybe when Europe is trying to, have dialogue with China, probably in the 70s or 80s or early 90s, there's like, you can feel like this is a one-way conversation. It's not really mutual. It's like, because Europe is probably, in terms of cultural projects, Europe was probably there, and China was at that. So it's more like it's an
Can you say a bit more about what is
term.
going one way?
So it would be like, oh, I wanna bring this project to Chinese audience. They will like it. They will love it. I'm pretty sure. and then but they don't really know like what really happens in the local context, and so that kind of wrong assumptions, and then you don't really have any people grounded in the local context that you can work closely with, that can probably improve your project and make it more locally relevant. So this is kind of one way, even a little bit enforcing kind of way of doing things is definitely not recommended. So
in my mind, I was going to ask to flip the question and say, what should we definitely not do? But you're already halfway there.
Yeah, so just bring people from both sides into one room and then allow some time, like before you jump into your project, your agenda, just allow some time to listen to each other, where you came from and what is your biggest concern and what is your biggest interest. Why do you want to work with each other? So just step back a little bit to ask yourself these questions, because the answers to these questions can definitely affect later and how do you do your project, if it's gonna lead to somewhere good. But a lot of the times I think we tend to forget that we don't really want to give up space, like before we start this project, and then we just really want to jump into that directly. Don't want to lose any seconds. But I think to step back and ask yourself these fundamental questions are very important. And also when you work with artists, I think they're not your servants. Like you tell them what to do and you have agenda. You want artists to like make a show and then to deliver your message. But more importantly, you've got to frame things together with the artists and then really to listen to them. So what do you think? And then allow them to use their own experience in co-making this project. So yeah, so I work quite a lot in inclusion and disability arts. And then in our field, we always say, nothing about us without us. I think it applies to every single aspect. So when you're working in this cultural relations field, really include people's voice at an early stage and then co-author this whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic what you're saying, because I feel like a large part of what is valuable about culture is listening to someone's world, whether that's in theatre or in music or in any form of culture, and letting it change you. Like that's such a huge part of what culture does. And it sounds like that's then not happening quite as effectively at the policy level around it. I'm sure there are plenty of questions. Hey, we know each other. I would love to hear your question. Is there a microphone available?
Hi, being a migrant coming from Central Europe, working in a culture, from my experience, I can say one thing: there is an incredible lack of knowledge about each other, culture. Do you think, in the eyes of what Lynn has said actually just a minute ago, about that Europe is much more than Western Europe? Because that's what I experienced a little bit. There is a gradation in value. The Western Europe is much more knowledge. You just shot French cheeses. That's the thing as a part of a culture. But if you talk about Bosnia and Herzegovina or Serbia or Poland, where I'm coming from, what are the important cultural aspects there? Do you think in that maybe European Commission and European Union should in the next few years give more attention, more focus to Central and Eastern European culture? Or you don't think it's necessary?
I'm going to evade the question a little bit. What I think is necessary is to put more attention on Central and Eastern Europe, and also the accession countries especially. I think we need to put more attention on the Western Balkans, and I think we need to put more attention on really Eastern Europe, down to the Caucasus, where people are on the streets, like in Georgia and in the Western Balkan, in Belgrade. We've heard about that today. And be with these people not only as lip service in our values, but also in our actions and in our support. And in the same sense, I think we need to be careful that we give the same support to cultural actors in Poland and Eastern Europe as we give to cultural actors in other parts of Europe. I'm reading.
Be quite a massive shift.
Well, it should be equally distributed. In reality, we see studies that there are biased selections when it comes to cooperation projects in Creative Europe or in Erasmus strategic projects, where maybe the competitive position of a consortium formed in Eastern Europe is not as strong as one in Western Europe. I said I'll evade the question because I'm not judging any national culture from any country. I'm trying to make the case for a supranational cultural collaboration, and that needs to be organized in a just way. And there we need to make sure that resources are distributed fairly.
You mean just
giving a little bit of knowledge and attention to? It's not about the resources. As they say in the European Commission, there was a big bang in the 2000s when all the Central Europe joined. It's not a long time ago.
I do wonder as well, perhaps that's too hopeful of me, which is out of character, but if having a more egalitarian conversation within Europe and a pan-European conversation would then lead to a more egalitarian conversation with countries in different continents? Yes.
Sorry, I just said. Sorry, I'm slow. I'm reacting a little bit slow on your question. Listen, I'm not from the EU. I'm from an advocacy organization that represents the diversity of the cultural sectors in Europe. So we are a lobby organization, but the good lobby. But we are very dependent on strong civil society. We are dependent on a discussion that is built up, bottom up. And as an example, why it might be easier for us to form our opinion, the opinions that we bring into the political conversation in Brussels with the Netherlands is, for instance, that Kunst 92 exists in the Netherlands. So Kunst 92 has an impressive membership, and I'm glad that someone is here. Kunst 92 is again then member of my organization, Culture Action Europe. So there's a cascading ripple up effect, so to speak, of opinion forming. So I can rely through Kunst 92 to know more or less the position of the cultural sector in the Netherlands. Black and white. There are other organizations that we would consult, but let's say Kunst 92 is a good example of a democratic organization of a stakeholder process. The more east I get, the more difficult it gets to find these sort of organizations. And there I see your point. We need to invest in capacity and knowledge to build up stakeholder consultations bottom up so that we really know what we have to advocate for. In some countries, it's really impressive. In Moldova, I'm a big fan of Moldova. I love Moldova. And there's the Coalitia of Independent Cultural Actors. They are struggling. They don't have any support to organize themselves, and yet they are so important for me to know what the sector in Moldova needs and what we need to feed back into the discussion in Brussels. And in that sense, yeah, maybe it's again back to resources, because we need to invest to support and get the knowledge there and the capacity building, and then how the sector organizes itself so that it's a stronger part of the democratic conversation.
There's plenty of work. We're getting close to time to round up, but I would love to ask you all what we should really take away that would be a loss if we didn't talk about it now. Is there anything you would really like to add? Because I know you're having another day of workshops tomorrow, and you've already had a lot of interesting workshops today.
Thank you. So
is there anything burning you would like us to think about?
Maybe just to finish, I will start with what you said, you know, that it was a big bang when during the enlargement time. I was working with my colleagues at the European Commission. It was panic. It was not only a bang, it was panic. And there's still some work to do in order to really feel that, you know, it's a Europe, it's also that part of Europe. It brings me also to this importance of, you know, for me, international relation, it starts at home. You have second, third, fourth generation of people coming from other countries, other parts of the world, you know, also work with diaspora. I would have loved to see plenty of people from the diaspora in this room today. So this is also a work that has to be done, because they are actually doing things without EU money, etc. So I think this is also something that, how come that, yes. And so we have a representative from a diasporic community from Poland, but it should be also something that that compass could be also sensitive to that kind of to that sector, so if I can call it so.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting that both the funding and the way that the democracies are organized, and the funding and the policy often don't mirror like the reality of the world. Like, it's not a new concept that we're moving around and influencing each other's culture. It's not a new concept that people are moving around Europe even before the 2000s. And it's quite strange, really, that we then get trapped in these as if we're like these really strict nation states and no one is from two countries, for example. It's quite strange. Lynn, I would love to invite you to what is a burning thing that would be a big loss if we didn't talk about?
Don't have any burning issues. Actually, I want to add something, like just give a hopeful message, add some positivity to you guys. Because as an outsider and also a collaborator with Europe, I feel like, you know, usually great changes happen in a time of crisis. So I would say, you know, now we're gathering here today, and also, you know, we're having this 2-day workshop with people coming from all over the world, colleagues from all over the world, to talk about it. This is already a great thing that is happening, you know, that we take time to pause and reflect and then to discuss about what is happening, because we can't take it for granted. Because I'm so amazed by how many people showed up today. And it's not just a closed door, like a classroom discussion happening in an academic institution. Because I was just imagining if I'm organizing something like that back in Shanghai, like a purely 100% open to the public, a session talking about cultural relations, how many people will show up? I don't know. So I think this is great. And you guys, you know, are gathering together and talking about this is already a great start, and we should have hope. Yeah.
I absolutely resonate with that. And it's really, really changed in the past 10 years how we're talking about Europe, how we're talking about international relations, how we're talking about cultural relations. And I'm really grateful that you're all here. And I hope that you continue the conversation now, because we will be offering you beverages over which you can continue to talk. To close tonight, I would really love to thank all three of you for your generosity and for being here and for sharing your thoughts. Audience, feel free to badger all of these people. Sorry to throw you to the wolves.
Thank you for moderating. Great job. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'm flattered. Thank you also to all of the people who made this evening possible. There's quite a few of them. The University of Amsterdam, Claske Vos, who we met earlier. The Amsterdam Center of European Studies. The ValEUs Network for helping bring this conversation together. I'd also really like to thank Simon, who was absolutely instrumental and always lovely to work with, from Dutch Culture. That is one of the many organizations at UNIC, which is working in cultural relations based here in Amsterdam. And that would give me an opportunity to name Domo, because I think especially in the crisis of property in Amsterdam, it is very exciting to me that there's a physical space where people are coming together, which is the building where Dutch Culture is located. In the heart of Amsterdam, where 4 organizations come together and work on cultural relations. I'm really happy that it exists, and it's a place to test out concepts and share projects and get a little bit more concrete about a lot of the things that we've been talking about tonight. So there's plenty more where that came from. Lastly, I would also really like to thank Spui 25, the place that we're in right now, for hosting us and for sorting everything out, including the beverages, which are on the way. That's enough from me. Yes, absolutely. The film was great. I would love it if... is there another way that we can follow the work that was behind that collective, Claske? Yeah.
Yes, Paola is here right now. She's actually one of the main persons behind the film, and I would definitely follow the work of the platform Historias en Kilometros. So there's a postcard, there's a website, but definitely also reach out to Paola, but also, anyone can reach out to me if you want to hear more about that, and I have the connections there, so happy to share that with all of you.
Fantastic. And I would also really encourage you to talk to each other, because there are a lot of really different people in the room, and there's plenty to learn from each other, so let's practice.
Thanks, Gats.